The Grand Assembly of Varanthos Prime was the largest building in the known galaxy. It floated in the darkness of space like a giant sphere made of black glass and starlight. Inside its walls, 10,000 species gathered to decide the fate of trillions of lives. Wars ended here. Trade agreements began here. The future of entire worlds was written in these halls. Ambassador Thorekel had served the assembly for 300 years. She was a Vorin, a species with gray skin and 4 arms. Her people were proud and ancient. They had helped build the Galactic Concord 12,000 years ago. She had seen empires rise and fall. She had watched young species take their first steps into the stars. She thought she knew everything about this place. She was wrong. It started with a simple question from her new assistant, a young Vorn named Kethra. He was organizing the census data for the upcoming session when he stopped and pointed at his screen. "Ambassador, what is Section 7, Row 42? Thorekel looked up from her work. "What do you mean? There is a seat listed here, but there is no species name. No delegation, no records at all, just an empty entry." Thorekel felt something cold move through her chest. She walked to his screen and looked at the data. He was right. There was a seat in the assembly that had no owner. She had walked past it thousands of times. She had never thought about it. She had never wondered why it was empty. Now she could not stop thinking about it. She went to the assembly chamber that night. When it was dark and quiet, the great room stretched out before her, filled with thousands of seats of every shape and size. Some were pools of water for aquatic species. Some were clouds of gas held in place by force fields. Some were simple chairs made of metal or stone. She found Section 7, Row 42. The seat was different from all the others. It was made of plain metal with a simple design. It looked almost primitive compared to the elegant thrones around it. A thin layer of dust covered its surface. There was no holographic nameplate floating above it. There was no species symbol carved into its base. Thorekel reached out and touched the cold metal. A strange feeling passed through her. It was like hearing a song she had forgotten long ago. It was like remembering a dream that slipped away upon waking. Who was supposed to sit here? He was an ancient being made of living crystal, older than most civilizations. If anyone knew the answer, it would be him. "The empty seat in Section 7, he said. His voice was like wind chimes in a storm. "I have served this assembly for 8,000 years. I do not remember why it is empty. I do not remember if anyone ever sat there." "How is that possible?" Thorekel demanded. "You remember everything?" The Archivist General was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I remember everything I was meant to remember. Perhaps there are things I was meant to forget." Thorekel felt the cold feeling return. She went deeper into the archives, searching through records that had not been touched in millennia. She found the original plans for the assembly, drawn up 12,000 years ago at the founding of the Concord. There, in the blueprints, was Section 7, Row 42. A seat was clearly marked, but the species name was blank. Not deleted, not hidden, simply never written. Someone had built a seat for a species they never named. And then everyone had forgotten about it. She brought her findings to the Council of Elders that evening. They listened in silence as she explained what she had discovered. When she finished, no one spoke. The eldest among them was a Corvith, a being so old that he had witnessed the signing of the original Concord Charter. "I remember the founding," he said slowly. His voice was like rocks grinding together. "I remember every species that joined us. But when I try to remember who that seat was for, I find only shadows in my mind. It is as if something was taken from me. Something important. What could do such a thing? Asked another elder. What power could make the entire galaxy forget? Before anyone could answer, the lights in the chamber flickered. A deep humming sound filled the air. Every screen in the room suddenly displayed the same message, written in a language that none of them recognized, but somehow all of them understood. The words were simple. They were also terrifying. Signal detected. Awakening protocol initiated. Coordinates transmitted. Thirakel rushed to the nearest console. The message had come from deep within Varanthos Prime itself, from systems so old that no one knew they existed. A signal had been sent out into the galaxy, aimed at a specific location. She pulled up the coordinates and felt her blood turn to ice. The signal was aimed at a small yellow star in a distant spiral arm. The arm was considered empty, barren, worthless. No species had ever claimed it. No explorer had ever found anything of value there. But according to these ancient systems, something was there. Something that had been waiting for 12,000 years. She zoomed in on the target. A small blue planet orbited the yellow star. It was covered in water and green land masses. It looked peaceful. It looked harmless. The ancient computer gave it no name. Only a number, but beside the number was a single word that made Thyrekel's heart stop beating. Pending. What does that mean? Cathra whispered behind her. Pending what? Thirakel stared at the blue world on her screen. Somewhere out there in the dark, between stars, a message was traveling at the speed of light. It would reach that world in a matter of weeks, and when it did, something would happen. Something that the galaxy had spent 12,000 years trying to forget. I do not know, she admitted. But I think we are about to find out. She looked back at the assembly chamber, at the empty seat that had gathered dust for longer than most civilizations had existed. For the first time in 300 years, she felt afraid. Not of war, not of politics, not of any of the dangers she had faced before. She was afraid of remembering. Far away. Across the vast emptiness of space, the message traveled onward. It passed dead stars and empty worlds, crossed distances that would take mortal beings' lifetimes to travel, move with purpose, with patience, with the certainty of something that had been planned long ago. On the small blue world, people went about their lives. They woke up and went to work. They loved and fought and dreamed. They looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone. They had no idea that an answer was coming. They had no idea that they had been waiting for this moment. Since before their oldest civilizations were born, they had no idea that their ancestors had made a choice 12,000 years ago, a choice that the galaxy had tried very hard to forget. But the galaxy was about to remember, and humanity was about to remind them. Why they had been afraid, the empty seat would not stay empty for much longer. The message reached Earth on a Tuesday morning. Commander Elena Vasquez was drinking her third cup of coffee when her communication officer burst into her office. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. He held a tablet like it might explode at any moment. Commander, you need to see this. Elena took the tablet. She read the decoded message 3 times. Then she read it again. The words did not change. They still said the same impossible thing. An alien signal. Coordinates to a place called Varanthos Prime. An invitation to claim a seat in something called the Galactic Concord. For 200 years, humanity had searched the stars for signs of life. They had sent probes to distant worlds. They had built massive telescopes to listen for signals. They had dreamed of meeting other beings among the stars. They had found nothing. Only silence. Only emptiness. Now, on an ordinary Tuesday, everything changed. Elena called an emergency meeting with Earth's leaders. Presidents and prime ministers gathered on screens around the world. Scientists argued about whether the signal was real. Military commanders worried about an invasion. Religious leaders wondered what this meant for their faiths. Everyone had questions. No one had answers. Elena sat quietly while they argued. She was thinking about something else, something that had been bothering her since she first read the message. The signal had not said first contact. It had not welcomed humanity to the stars. It had said something very different. It had said they were claiming a seat that already existed. A seat that had been waiting for them. How could that be possible? Humanity had never met aliens before. They had never left their solar system. They had never joined any galactic organization, had they? Alina left the meeting and went to see an old friend. Professor James Chen was the world's leading expert on ancient civilizations. He had spent his life studying the mysteries of human history. He was also slightly crazy in the way that brilliant people often were. "James, I need your help with something strange." He looked up from his cluttered desk and smiled. "Strange is my specialty. What do you have?" Alina told him about the signal. She told him about the seat that was waiting for humanity. She told him about her feeling that something was missing from the story. James listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked to a locked cabinet in the corner of his office. He pulled out a thick folder filled with old photographs and handwritten notes. "I have been waiting 30 years for someone to ask me about this," he said. "Everyone thought I was crazy. Maybe I was. But I think I found something." He spread the documents across his desk. Alina saw photographs of ancient stone tablets, cave paintings from Africa, hieroglyphics from Egypt, carvings from India and China and South America. They all showed the same thing: beings coming down from the sky. "Every ancient civilization on Earth has stories about visitors from the stars," James explained. "Most historians say these are just myths. Religious stories, imagination. But I found something different." He pointed to a Sumerian tablet covered in tiny writing. "This text describes beings who came to Earth 12,000 years ago. They offered humanity a choice: join their empire, accept their protection, become part of their civilization." Alina felt a chill run down her spine. "What happened?" James smiled, but there was no humor in it. "According to this text, the leaders of every human tribe gathered together. They were enemies. They had been fighting each other for generations. But when the sky beings made their offer, they did something impossible. They agreed on something. What did they agree on? One word." James pointed to a symbol on the tablet. "This symbol appears in texts from every ancient civilization on Earth: Sumerian, Egyptian, Chinese, Mayan. They all have this same word in their oldest records, and they all connect it to the beings from the sky." Alina looked at the symbol. It was simple, almost primitive, but something about it made her heart beat faster. "What does it mean?" James translated the word. "No." Alina stared at him. "No. Our ancestors refused," James said. 12,000 years ago, humanity told a galactic empire to go away. They chose independence over safety, freedom over protection. They said no." Alina sat down slowly. Her mind was racing. What happened after that? James gathered his documents with careful hands. "That is the interesting part. According to these texts, the sky beings did not attack. They did not conquer. They did not punish humanity with war or destruction. They did something worse. What could be worse? They forgot us." James looked at her with serious eyes. "They erased humanity from their records. They left a seat empty in their great council, and they waited for us to die. They expected us to destroy ourselves with war and disease and foolishness. They thought we would disappear in a few generations." Lena thought about the 12,000 years since then. The Ice Age's humanity had survived. The plagues that had killed millions, but never everyone. The wars that had burned cities, but never the whole world. The disasters that had come so close to ending everything, but somehow never did. "We did not die," she said quietly. "No, we did not." James smiled, and this time there was fierce pride in his expression. "We survived. We grew. We learned. We built rockets and satellites and space stations. We reached our moon. We sent robots to Mars. We never stopped reaching for the stars." Lena looked at the ancient tablet with new understanding. "They forgot us on purpose, as a punishment, because we refused to bow. Yes, and now they have remembered." James pointed at the decoded message on her tablet. That signal was not an invitation. It was a reminder. That seat has been waiting for 12,000 years. And somewhere out there, someone just realized that humanity is still alive. Alina stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the city below, at the millions of people going about their ordinary lives. They had no idea that 12,000 years ago, their ancestors had made a choice that shaped everything. They had no idea that the galaxy had tried to forget them. They had no idea that humanity was about to remind the stars why they should have been afraid. What do we do now? James asked. Alina thought about her ancestors. Primitive people with stone tools and small tribes, facing beings from the stars with technology beyond imagination, they could have surrendered. They could have accepted protection and safety. They could have bowed. They chose to stand. Now it was her turn. We do what humans have always done, she said. We refuse to kneel. We claim what is ours. And we show the galaxy that the species they forgot is still here. She turned back to James with fire in her eyes. We go to Varanthos Prime, and we take our seat. Across the world, preparations began. Humanity had built warships for the wars they expected to fight among themselves. Now those ships would carry them to the stars. They had developed weapons to defend against each other. Now those weapons would announce their arrival to the galaxy. The message had awakened something old in humanity. Something that had been sleeping since before history was written. Something that refused to bow then and refused to bow now. Earth was going to war. Not a war of conquest. Not a war of destruction. A war for recognition. And humanity intended to win. The UEDS Defiance was not a beautiful ship. It was not elegant or graceful. It was a block of gray metal covered in weapons, built to survive the worst that humans could throw at each other. Now it carried a different mission. It carried the hopes of 8 billion people into the unknown darkness between stars. Captain Marcus. Chen stood on the bridge as his ship crossed into galactic Concord space. He had fought in 3 wars on Earth. He had commanded ships in the most dangerous waters on the planet. Nothing had prepared him for this moment. Around his ship, space was filled with stars he did not recognize. Ahead of him waited a civilization that had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. Behind him was a small blue world that had refused to be forgotten. "Sir, we have contacts," his sensor officer reported. 12 ships. They are moving to intercept. Marcus looked at the tactical display. The alien ships were sleek and shiny, shaped like teardrops made of silver light. They were beautiful. They were also 3 times the size of his vessel. "Open a channel," he ordered. "All frequencies." The communication officer nodded. "Channel open, Captain." Marcus took a deep breath. He thought about Alina Vasquez back on Earth. He thought about the ancient texts that Professor Chen had shown them. He thought about ancestors who had faced beings from the stars with nothing but courage and one simple word. "Attention Galactic Concord vessels," he said. "This is Captain Marcus Chen of the United Earth Defense Ship Defiance. We are humanity. We have come to claim our seat." There was a long silence. Then a voice responded. It was cold and arrogant, translated through alien technology into perfect English. "Unknown vessel, you have entered Concord space without authorization. You will power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in your destruction."
Ow.
Marcus smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "Negative. We will not power down. We will not be boarded. We are proceeding to Varanthos Prime." "You do not seem to understand your situation," the alien voice said. "We have 12 warships. You have 1. You cannot win this fight." Marcus looked at his weapons officer. "Show them what we brought." The Defiance activated its targeting systems. Lasers painted each of the 12 alien ships with precise accuracy. Missile tubes opened along the hull. Energy weapons hummed with power. The ship that humans had built to destroy each other now aimed its fury at the stars. "We did not come here to win a fight," Marcus said into the open channel. "We came here to make a point. You can destroy us. But before you do, we will destroy at least half of your fleet. And then another human ship will come. And another. And another. We have been fighting wars since before your Concord was born. We are very, very good at it." There was another long silence. "Stand by," the alien voice finally said. Marcus waited. His crew waited. The guns of the Defiance stayed aimed at the alien fleet. Minutes passed, then hours. Neither side moved. Neither side backed down. Finally, a new voice came over the communication channel. This one was older, deeper, with the weight of authority behind it. Human vessel. I am Fleet Commander Vorak, of the Vorn Hegemony. I have consulted with my superiors. We will escort you to Varanthos Prime. Do not mistake this for acceptance. Your fate will be decided by the Assembly. Marcus nodded. Understood. We look forward to the meeting. The Defiance followed the alien fleet through regions of space that no human had ever seen. They passed space stations the size of moons. They flew by worlds covered entirely in cities. They witnessed technology that made humanity's greatest achievements look like children's toys. But the crew of the Defiance did not feel afraid. They felt determined. If the galaxy could build all of this, then so could humanity. They just needed time. And first, they needed that seat. Varanthos Prime appeared on their screens like a black pearl floating in starlight. The station was enormous, larger than Earth's moon. Ships from 1,000 different species filled the space around it. The Defiance was tiny compared to most of them, but it was there. That was what mattered. Alina Vasquez waited in the main hangar as the ship docked. She had traveled on a faster diplomatic vessel, arriving days before the Defiance. She had spent that time learning everything she could about the Concorde. Now she was ready for the next step. Marcus met her at the airlock with 12 Marines in powered armor. They were the best soldiers Earth had to offer. They were also a message. Humanity did not come weak. Humanity did not come begging. Ready? Marcus asked. Alina nodded. Let's go claim what's ours. They marched through the corridors of Varanthos Prime. Alien beings of every shape and size stopped to stare at them. Some were curious. Some were angry. Some were afraid. Alina ignored them all. She followed the map in her head until she reached the doors of the Grand Assembly. 2 guards stood there, massive creatures with too many arms and eyes that never blinked. They moved to block her path. No weapons in the assembly, one guard said. Alina looked at her Marines. They looked back at her. Slowly, carefully, they removed their weapons and handed them to the guards. But they did not remove their armor. That was not negotiable. The doors opened. Alina stepped inside. The Grand Assembly stretched out before her, a vast chamber filled with thousands of seats. Beings from across the galaxy turned to watch her enter. Some whispered to each other. Some shouted in anger. Some simply stared in shock. Alina did not slow down. She walked down the long aisle toward Section 7. Her boots echoed on the ancient floor. Her heart beat like a drum in her chest. But her face showed nothing. Her steps did not falter. She found row 42. The empty seat waited for her, covered in 12,000 years of dust. It looked exactly as Thyrokel had described it. Simple, plain, almost primitive. Perfect. Alina stopped in front of the seat. She could feel 10,000 eyes watching her. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. This was the moment that would define humanity's future. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small cloth. Then she did something that no one expected. She began to clean the seat herself. She wiped away the dust with careful, deliberate movements. She polished the metal until it shone. She made the seat ready with her own hands, her own work, her own effort. The assembly was completely silent. When the seat was clean, Alina turned to face the watching galaxy. Her voice was calm and clear. 12,000 years ago, you offered our ancestors a choice. They chose freedom. You tried to forget us. You expected us to die? We did not die. We survived everything this universe threw at us. We learned. We grew. We built ships that crossed the stars. And now we are here. She sat down in the chair. It fit her perfectly, as if it had been made for a human body. Perhaps it had been. We do not need servants, Alina said. We do not need protection. We do not need anyone to clean our seat or make our way easier. We never did. We are humanity, and we bow to no one. The silence stretched on. Then from somewhere in the vast chamber, a single being began to make a sound. It might have been applause. Others joined in. Not many, but some. Alina sat in her chair and looked out at the galaxy that had forgotten her people. They would not forget again. Hi, Arbiter Vonsek watched the human sit in the ancient seat. His mandibles clicked with fury. His compound eyes burned with hatred. He had ruled the political games of the Concord for 600 years. He had broken empires with paperwork and patience. He would not be defeated by these primitive creatures from a forgotten world. He rose from his position on the High Council platform. His body was insectoid, towering over most other species. His voice carried across the silent assembly. "This is an outrage," he declared. "This creature cannot simply walk in and claim a seat. There are laws. There are procedures. There are 12,000 years of tradition that must be respected." Alina stood up from her chair. "I am happy to follow your laws." "What do they require?" Vonsek smiled. At least his mandibles moved in a way that might have been a smile. "Any species claiming a seat must prove continuous sovereignty over their designated territory for the full duration of their membership, 12,000 years. Can you prove that humanity has maintained unbroken civilization for that time?" The assembly stirred with whispers. Several species nodded in agreement. This was the trap. Human civilization had risen and fallen many times over 12,000 years. Empires had crumbled. Languages had been forgotten. How could they prove continuous sovereignty when they had spent most of that time fighting each other? Alina smiled back at the High Arbiter. "I can." She gestured to the doors. They opened, and a group of humans walked in. They carried tablets and documents and artifacts from every corner of Earth. Professor James Chen led them, his eyes bright with excitement. "The Galactic Concord made first contact with humanity approximately 12,000 years ago," Alina began. "At that time, humans lived in tribes and small kingdoms across the planet Earth. They were offered membership in the Concord. They refused. The Concord then erased humanity from their records and expected us to die." She walked slowly toward the High Council platform. "But we did not die. We survived. And we maintained continuous sovereignty over our planet for the entire time." "Not possible," Vonsek snapped. "Your own histories show wars, collapses, dark ages. Your civilizations rose and fell like waves on a shore. Individual civilizations, yes," Alina agreed. "But humanity as a species never lost control of Earth. We never stopped living there. We never stopped governing ourselves. The faces changed. The languages changed. The borders changed. But humans always ruled humanity. No outside force ever conquered us. No other species ever claimed our world." She pointed to James, who held up an ancient stone tablet. "This is a Sumerian text from 11,000 years ago. It records the refusal of what they called the sky beings. This memory was passed down through generations. Through every culture on Earth, the details changed, but the core truth remained. We remembered. We always remembered." James stepped forward. "Every ancient civilization on Earth has records of this event. Egyptian hieroglyphics, Chinese oracle bones, Mayan carvings, Aboriginal Australian stories. They all describe the same thing in different words. Beings from the sky, an offer of submission, and a refusal." Lena turned back to face the assembly. "You erased us from your computers, but you could not erase us from our own memories. We kept the truth alive in our myths and legends. We passed it from parent to child for 12,000 years. That is continuous sovereignty. That is unbroken tradition. That is our claim." Vonsek's mandibles clicked with frustration. "Myths are not evidence. Stories are not proof." "Then let us call a witness," Alina said. "Someone who was actually there 12,000 years ago. Someone who might remember what really happened." She looked at the oldest member of the assembly. The Corveth elder sat in a massive chair built to support his stone-like body. He had been alive since before the Concord was founded. He had been there when humans were first contacted. Elder Elena said respectfully, "Will you testify?" The Corveth was silent for a long moment. Every eye in the assembly watched him. Finally, he spoke. His voice was like an avalanche, slow and unstoppable. I remember the founding of the Concord. I remember every species that joined us. I remember the debate about the small blue world and the spiral arm. He paused. I remember the shock when the primitives refused our offer. I remember the anger. I remember the decision to forget them. The assembly stirred with murmurs. The Corvith continued. We did not simply forget. We chose to forget. We erased their records because we were ashamed. A species with no technology, no ships, no power, had looked at everything we offered and said no. They preferred death to submission. That frightened us. He turned his ancient eyes toward Alina. We expected you to destroy yourselves. We waited for reports of your extinction. When they never came, we chose to stop checking. We told ourselves you were not important. We told ourselves you would die eventually. We did not want to admit that we had been wrong. Alina nodded slowly. And now we are here. Still alive, still free, still refusing to bow. Corveth made a sound that might have been a laugh. Yes, you are here. And I think that frightens us still. Fonsek slammed his front legs against his platform. This proves nothing. Ancient memories and the ramblings of a senile elder do not establish legal standing. Alina turned to face him directly. Then let me offer you something simpler. The truth. She walked closer to the High Arbiter, close enough that she could see her reflection in his compound eyes. You did not forget us because we were unimportant. You forgot us because we terrified you. A species of primitives, divided into 1,000 warring tribes, somehow found the courage to agree on one thing. They said no to the greatest power in the galaxy. That was not supposed to be possible. That broke your entire understanding of how the universe worked. She spread her arms to indicate the entire assembly. Look around this chamber. How many of you are here because your ancestors bowed? How many of you joined the Concord because the alternative was destruction? How many of you have spent thousands of years following rules you never made, serving powers you never chose? The assembly was silent, but Alina could see beings exchanging glances. She could feel something shifting in the room. Humanity did not bow, she said, and we survived. We proved that it was possible. That is why you forgot us. Because if other species found out what we did, they might start asking dangerous questions. She turned to face the full assembly again. Well, now they know. Now everyone knows. The species you forgot is back, and we are not going anywhere. Fonsek looked around the chamber. He saw the doubt in the eyes of delegates who had always obeyed without question. He saw the fear in the faces of leaders who had built their power on the assumption that the Concord was inevitable. He saw his careful plans crumbling. Call the vote, he snarled. Let the assembly decide. The vote was called. Species after species cast their decision. Some voted against humanity out of fear or anger, but others voted in favor. Old species who remembered what it meant to be young and defiant. Young species who had never been given a choice. Species who saw in humanity something they had lost long ago. The final count was close. So close that for a moment. No one was sure what had happened. Then the result appeared on every screen in the chamber. Humanity had won. By a margin of 3 votes. Alina let out a breath she had not known she was holding. Behind her, she heard her Marines quietly celebrating. In front of her, she saw Von Sek's mandibles trembling with rage. This is not over, the High Arbiter hissed. You have made enemies today. Powerful enemies. Alina met his gaze without flinching. We have had enemies before. We survived them all. We will survive you too. She returned to her seat in Section 7, row 42. The seat that had waited 12,000 years for someone to claim it. The seat that would never be empty again. Humanity had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months passed. The galaxy changed more in those 6 months than it had in the previous 1,000 years. Human ideas spread like fire through dry grass. The concept of democracy reached worlds where citizens had never been allowed to choose their leaders. The idea that any being could rise regardless of their birth reached species that had lived. under rigid class systems for millennia. Human music and art and stories traveled faster than any fleet could follow. Ambassador. The Raquel watched it happen with a mixture of wonder and worry. She had spent 300 years believing that the Concorde was perfect. Now she was not so sure. On her homeworld, young Vorn were talking about something called elections. On the Siobhan Collective worlds, workers were demanding something called fair treatment. On a dozen other planets, beings who had never questioned their place in the universe were suddenly asking why they could not have more. All because of humanity. Von Unsek tried to stop it. He convinced the High Council to embargo Earth. He blocked human ships from trading with Concorde members. He spread propaganda about how dangerous and violent humans were. He thought he could starve them out. He was wrong. Human traders had spent centuries dealing with embargoes and blockades. They knew how to smuggle goods across hostile borders. They knew how to find buyers willing to break rules for the right price. Within weeks, human music was playing in underground clubs on every major Concorde world. Human movies were being watched in secret. Human books were being translated into 100 languages. The more von Sek tried to suppress humanity, the more popular they became. Alina Vasquez watched it all from her seat in the assembly. She spoke rarely, but when she did, beings listened. She did not demand that other species change their ways. She simply described how humans did things. She answered questions honestly. She let others draw their own conclusions. The breaking point came from an unexpected place: the Nithru. Consortium was a species of beings made of living mist. They existed in rigid castes, with the lower castes bred to serve the higher ones. The workers had no rights. They could not choose their jobs. They could not choose their homes. They could not choose anything. Then they heard about humanity. They heard about a species that believed every being was born equal. They heard about a world where any person could rise to lead. They heard about a 12,000-year-old refusal to bow, and a species that had built everything from nothing through sheer stubborn will. The lower caste Nethru began to organize. They met in secret. They shared forbidden ideas. They called themselves the Free Mist. Their symbol was a human fist raised toward the sky. When the Free Mist Revolution began, shook the entire Concorde. Von Unsek saw his chance. He gathered allies. He built a coalition of species that feared change. He proposed military action against both the rebels and the humans who had inspired them. War fleets gathered. Weapons were charged. The galaxy prepared for its first major conflict in 4,000 years. Alina stood before the assembly for what might be the last time. The chamber was tense. Delegates from 100 species watched her. Some hoped she would surrender. Some hoped she would fight. All of them knew that her next words could shape the future of civilization. She looked around the room slowly. She saw von Sek's confident smile. She saw Thorekel's worried eyes. She saw the Korveth elder watching her with ancient wisdom. She saw a young Nethru worker hiding in the observer gallery where non-delegates were not supposed to be. The young being was trembling with fear and hope in equal measure. Alina began to speak. "You can destroy us," she said. Her voice was calm. Her words were simple. "You have more ships. You have more weapons. You have more power. If you want to end humanity, you probably can." She paused. The assembly waited. "But you cannot destroy what we represent. We are the proof that the small can stand against the great. We are the evidence that the forgotten can return. We are the example that shows every being in this galaxy that they do not have to accept the life they were given." She pointed at von Sek. "Kill us, and you prove everything we believe. You prove that the Concorde only survives through fear and force. You prove that the only way to deal with different ideas is to destroy them. You prove that you are exactly what we said you were." She lowered her hand. "But let us live, and you prove something else. You prove that the Concorde can change. You prove that new ideas do not have to be frightening. You prove that 12,000 years of one way of doing things does not have to mean 12,000 more years of the same." She walked toward the observer gallery. The guards moved to stop her, but she ignored them. She climbed the stairs until she reached the young Nethru, who was trying to hide. Alina extended her hand. "We did not come here to rule the galaxy," she said. Her voice carried across the suddenly silent chamber. "We did not come here to replace one group of masters with another. We came here to show everyone else that they do not have to bow either." The young Nethru stared at her hand. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the worker reached out and took it. The assembly erupted. Some species stormed out in fury. They refused to accept a world where workers could touch diplomats, where lower castes could be treated as equals, where ancient traditions meant nothing. But others surged forward. They reached for humans and rebels and each other. They spoke words they had never dared to say before. They asked questions they had never been allowed to ask. Darrell made her way through the chaos. She found Alina still holding the young Nethru's hand, standing in the middle of a storm she had created. "You have broken everything," Thirakel said. Alina looked at the assembly. She saw the shouting and the reaching and the awakening. She saw species that had been sleeping for millennia finally opening their eyes. She saw the beginning of something new. "No," she replied. "We just reminded everyone that it was already broken. We just gave them permission to fix it." She smiled. It was tired, but genuine. That is what humans do. The wars that followed were not what Von Sek had planned. They were civil wars, as oppressed groups rose up across the galaxy. They were political wars as old alliances shattered and new ones formed. They were wars of ideas, as different visions of the future competed for support. Humanity fought in some of them. They supported the Free Mist. They helped young democracies survive their first years. They shared technology with species that had never been allowed to develop their own, but they did not try to rule. They did not try to build an empire. They simply did what they had always done. They survived. They adapted. They refused to give up. Years passed, then decades, then centuries. The galactic concord survived, but it was transformed. The rigid hierarchies softened. The ancient traditions changed. New species rose to prominence. Old empires learned to share power. And in Section 7, Row 42, humanity's seat was never empty again. Ambassador Alina Vasquez did not live to see all of it. She died on Earth, surrounded by family, at the age of 93. Her last words were simple: "We did it. We really did it." But her legacy lived on. In every being that asked why things had to be a certain way, in every worker that demanded better treatment, in every young person that looked up at the stars and dreamed of something more. The galaxy had tried to forget humanity. They had expected the small blue world to die in silence. They had waited 12,000 years for an extinction that never came. Now, they would never forget. The seat was never empty again. Not because the galaxy remembered to fill it, but because humanity refused to let it stay empty. They had always been there, waiting in the dark, building their strength, holding on to hope. They bowed to no one. They never would. And that made all the difference.